So hello and welcome to part 4 of the demand module, and today we'll be just talking about some bonus content. So the past 3 lectures that we've had, past 3 videos that you've seen, these were things that were related to what was things in your textbook: basic demand, the demand function, shifts in demand, and all of that. Now this particular video here, this particular recording, this will be bonus content. This is stuff that you'll not be tested on, but this is just stuff for your added interest. And again, this is not mandatory viewing. You don't need to view this for your exams or any of that sort. This is just for extra information, and there will be plenty of additional references here, which again, you're not required to have a read at, but if you're interested, as I was back in several years ago, please do have a read at those. Okay, so we'll start off now. And our background for today is in Gothenburg, Sweden, particularly the headquarters of Volvo. So basically, Volvo is one of those large car manufacturers. They manufacture cars and trucks. And we'll be looking today at the car market as part of our analysis. One of the things that we will be talking about today will be cars. So without further ado, let's begin. So just a recap on what we've done before. So basically, we've been talking about demand. And one of the biggest and most important concepts that we had was the law of demand, where basically we learned that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. That is, if we increase the price of a good, we can expect the quantity demanded to go down. And at the same time, if we decrease the price of the good, we can expect the quantity demanded to go up. So this is an inverse relationship, and the reason why it's called law of demand is because this is something that we can take as granted is true. Okay, but we will be seeing today with this lecture how there are some things that may not necessarily conform to that, and we'll see why. So this is just a graphical representation of the law of demand, as you can see again. If we increase the price, the quantity demanded goes down, and if we decrease the price, the quantity demanded goes up. Okay, simple enough, I hope. So let's begin first with a story on jewelry. And so this is a story of how the law of demand is seemingly broken. And it's one of the first stories I've read from a book. That was one of the first books that I've read on popular economics. And particularly, this is the first book I've read on behavioral economics, which I will explain later what that is. So this is a book called Predictably Irrational by Dana Reilly. And I think the opening story of that book. So I've read this book several years ago, 7-8 years ago, maybe even a decade ago, I'm not really sure, but this is one of the stories that he had. So he had a friend who owned a jewelry store, and now part of her jewelry store was there was some sort of jewels that she could not get rid of. Okay, so she just decided, okay, fine, we'll just take the loss. And she wrote a note saying, please, the price in half. Okay, law of demand, right? If we decrease the price, we could expect quantity demanded to go up. So so she's thinking, if I decrease the price, then I can get rid of it, because that means people will actually buy this, and then I can get rid of this stock and then make way for new stock. So that's what her thinking was. However, for some inexplicable reason, the note was read wrongly, and instead of cutting the price in half, the employees doubled the price of the jewels. So you might think, well, from the law of demand, if the price increases, then the quantity demanded would go down, right? But if she wasn't actually selling those jewels before, like if she wasn't being able to make them sell by the original price, surely if we double that price, then no one would buy that. And this was the fascinating part of this story that was completely violated. Everyone, within by a week or something like that, all the jewels were bought. Okay, she doubled the price, and more people decided they wanted the jewels. So that seems to break the law of demand, doesn't it? Because we know if we increase price, quantity demanded should go down. However, this is one of those examples where actually it went up, right? So this is one of those questions that we had. Why did that happen? Well, we'll talk about that later. For now, let's go to a different case study. A different study, okay? Are expensive medicines better? So we'll talk about medicine. And this is a study that was done, quite a famous study, all right? Where they had two groups of people, let's say group blue and group red. They were given the exact same medicine, all right? The exact same medicine, and it was a placebo. If for those of you who don't know what placebo is, it means it's not really a medicine. It's claimed to be a medicine, but it's actually not. And somehow through the belief that it is a medicine, it actually cures you, okay, or it actually helps treat your disease. Now, they were given so these two groups were given the exact same medicine, right? However, one catch is when they were administered this medicine, the first group was given the researchers told the first group the medicine was cheap, and the second group was told that the medicine was expensive. Again, this is the exact same medicine, exact same placebo, but one group was told it was cheap and the other group was told it was expensive. So what do you think happened? Rationally thinking, right? Usually, we would think that the labels don't matter. Whether something's cheap or expensive, medicine is medicine, right? The effect of medicine shouldn't really matter on how much it costs. However, as from this LA Times article says, the researchers found that the expensive placebos worked better than the cheaper ones. And so this is just one of those things where it's just bewildering. So how does this relate to the jewelry case study? Well, let's have a think first. Yeah, so the question is, what's happening here? Let's have a think first. Let's go through the thought process of somebody who is receiving one of those medicines, or even somebody who's buying expensive medicine. I think this is also quite relevant to most of us, since usually, right, we got branded versus generic medicines, especially in the Philippines, where there's a lot of generic medicines, but a lot of us, if we were to admit, would still prefer the branded medicines, just because we think that the generic medicines aren't as effective, air quotes there. So let's go through a thought process of somebody who's buying one of these medicines, okay? Okay, so first thought, right? If I'm spending more, that means I'm giving up more opportunities. For example, if I'm spending, let's say, 100 pesos on this pill instead of like 5 pesos, that means I'm spending the 95 peso difference could have gone for something else. So this is basically opportunity cost. Spending more medicine means I'm giving up more opportunities. The opportunity cost is way higher. Therefore, if I'm thinking that way, this drug must be worth it if I'm giving up that much. Right? That's the second thought process. Otherwise, if this drug isn't worth it, if it isn't worth it being more expensive, why am I going to buy the more expensive drug? Right? So, first thought process, if I'm spending more, then I'm giving up more. Second thought, well, if I'm giving up more, then this should probably be better. Okay, because otherwise, why would I give up more? And then the next thought process that we have is, well, how can a drug be worth it? It works better, right? Obviously. So that means it's more effective. Therefore, the more expensive drug should work better, right? So that's a thought process of how we humans think. It may be subconsciously, it may be a conscious experience, but somehow along those lines, it's kind of that's how we think of when we think of why we prefer more expensive drugs over less expensive drugs. And we can extend this process. So whether consciously or subconsciously, we know price should correlate quality, right? That the more expensive something is, the better it should be. Because otherwise, why would I go for the more expensive option if it's not better? So this is what we call signaling. Okay, the price signals. It tells us the quality of the good. It tells the consumer how good the medicine is, how good other things are. Okay, so why do we use price as a signal? It's a good question. Because of what we call information asymmetry, which means basically It's because that's the only information that we have. For example, for most of us, we're not pharmacists or we're not doctors, so we actually don't know how these drugs work, right? And so, for most of us, we just rely on information given to us by other people. Or, in the absence of that information, we just think, well, the price could tell us whether something is more effective or not. That's called information asymmetry. It's because the people selling us the medicine know much more than us who are consuming the medicine. Okay? And so, and this doesn't just apply to medicine. This applies to so many other things, all right? This is a very important concept in economics. It's called information asymmetry, where if there is unequal or an unbalanced information distribution between the consumers and the sellers, then there's going to be some sort of bias, obviously, right? So here's some nosy bits. So information asymmetry is when one party to an economic transaction, so either the seller or the consumer, possesses greater material knowledge than the other party. And usually, but not always, it's the seller who knows more information. Okay, and you can think of a lot of examples of this. You can think of the housing market, how most people probably won't know the price of a house, whereas a house broker would, right? Somebody who sells houses probably would. Or even something as severe as like funeral homes, or like funeral homes, because aside from the fact that you're already in distress, right? You also don't know exactly how much a funeral would cost, because you pray you don't do that every time. But people who work in funeral homes, they price that every day, and so they actually have more advantage because they know this, whereas we don't. Okay, so this is what we call information asymmetry, and this is one of the things that seem to break the law of demand, mainly because we don't know how much we should be pricing things for. So now, the concept of information asymmetry actually came from this guy. So this is George Akerlof, and he won the 2001 Nobel Prize Award for his work on information asymmetry, along with two other guys. And so his original paper on information asymmetry was this: the market for lemons, quality uncertainty, and the market mechanism. Basically, lemons just mean bad product. And usually, and this is where we get to why we have the Volvo plant as our background, the Volvo headquarters, is because he used cars as an example. Okay, and we'll turn to that now. So there's this question: what is the worst day for a car's value? Okay, so this is a brand new car, right? This is a brand new car, an Altis, and as you can see, it goes for about, I don't know, a million to 1.6 million pesos. Now I searched around the internet and looked at listings for second-hand cars and look at the price. Now, granted, some of these cars are quite old, but as you can see, they're really far away, aren't they, from the original price? And now the reason for this is, aside from the fact that they're second-hand, even if you buy a car actually and then decide to return it the next day, you're gonna get the car's value will go down so much. All right. So to answer that question, what's the worst day for a car's value? It's the day it gets out of the dealership, because of something we call, and this is what Akerlof argues as information asymmetry. So a lemon is basically a car that isn't that good. Okay, so it's because again, let's go to the next slide. Because not all cars are made equal. Some cars are good, some cars are lemons, okay? And lemons basically are cars that are not that good. Okay, so maybe there was something wrong in the production process. Maybe there was a part that wasn't correctly installed. Maybe the I don't know, the engine just wasn't that good compared to other cars. So it's the same model, and all cars from the outside kind of look the same, right? All Corollas, all Kias, they kind of all look the same. So how do you know with the car is a lemon? Well, you don't really until you actually start driving it quite a bit, right? So who would know whether a car is a lemon? Answer: only the buyer after he has driven the car for some time. And now there's a problem. Okay, if for example you're going to, let's say you bought a car and you decided to return it the next day, you can't sell that for close to the original value because the dealer, the person the person you're trying to sell the car to, doesn't know whether the car is a lemon or not, and he can't fully trust you when you just say, "Oh, I just decided I don't want to buy this car anymore because I have of all these reasons." One of the reasons might be that the car is a lemon, if the car isn't good, and so there's that problem because again, there is information asymmetry. The person you're talking to doesn't know whether or not why you're selling that car. It's most probably because the car is not good. And if the car isn't that good, why am I going to pay that much? So what happens is because of that, it depresses the value of the car. So if you sell a car the day after you've bought it, the price is just going to go down way down. And so that's the worst day for a car's value, the day you get it out of a dealership, because the value of that car just goes down. Okay? Because if it's a good car, the assumption is you'll keep it. If it's a bad car, you'd want to sell it. And therefore, if you're trying to sell a car that you just bought yesterday, there's a good probability it's a bad car. And I'm not going to pay that much for a bad car. I hope that's clear. So going back to jewelry then, how does information asymmetry explain to us the story of the story that we began with? Okay? So the key question here is, did customers buy the jewelry simply because they thought it was expensive? In other words, did the law of demand just break there? Oh, the price increased. Yes, I'm going to buy more. Or was it because they thought they were getting better quality jewelry? Again, the story doesn't tell us whether it was the same customers. And to be honest with you, I doubt it was the same customers. Why? Because people coming in, right, and see a more expensive, let's say, see a more expensive ring, they're gonna think, oh, that ring must be worth it then because it's a bit more expensive, right? Oh, it must be, for example, it's a diamond ring. The diamond there must be bigger or something like that, or must be purer or something more rare because it's more expensive, right? If something is very cheap, if a diamond ring sells for very cheap, you're gonna doubt the quality of the diamond or whether or not it's even a diamond. However, if it's more expensive, what happens now is not the fact that the law of demand breaks, but the fact that the customers, because they didn't know what was happening because of information asymmetry, they think they're getting a higher quality good instead of the fact, even though as a jeweler, you're literally selling them the exact same good. It's just that the customers don't know. Again, information asymmetry. So that kind of explains what happened to the jewelry question that we had. Yeah. Now, we move on to another case study on phones. So, and this is a question I've been hinting to since the start of the module. Why did we not use phones as an example of previous discussions? And mainly because I was not comfortable with using phones as an example, because they kind of don't seem to follow the law of demand, which I will show you now. So 8 years ago, Um, I was back in high school at that point in time, and I got my first iPhone. It was an iPhone 5C. That is not that. That is the same color, but that is not my phone. I just got that off a random site on the internet. But yeah, I had one of those phones. Now we're in the iPhone X something, and how much time has flown. But anyways, as you can see here, this is a graph from Uswitch, a UK site, and you can see that over time, the price of phones have increased, right? The premium phones. However, there are also budget phones, even smartphones that are on a budget, that the price continually decrease. You got new technology coming in, so these things should decrease. However, the premium trend, the price seems to be increasing. Let's have a look at another graph. So again, here we go. Here's our cost curves, right? How much phones cost throughout the years, right? So price increases. So what do you think? Law of demand tells us quantity should increase. More expensive, less people would probably want to buy them. What's actually happened? Yeah, quantity's actually increased over time. This is again one of those things where we seem to think, has the law of demand been violated here? Not necessarily. However, it's again, this was back in the day, 8 years ago, when I got an iPhone. I genuinely thought, and you're paying Apple for the brand of it, whereas Samsung's at that time wasn't that expensive. Samsung was closer to the mid-range phone. Now some Samsungs are actually some phones are actually more expensive than iPhones, and it's that kind of thing where phones have been getting more and more expensive, but it seems as if counterintuitively people seem to be buying more phones. So why is that? That's the question. So questions then. So is it getting more expensive to produce phones? That's why price has been increasing? Well, not necessarily. I mean, we got more innovations, but you can see from the graph last time, the other graph, right? So there was the premium line and there was the budget line. The budget line is actually getting cheaper. We're getting better and better technology. That's actually making products cheaper. Well, can it be fully explained by information asymmetry? Partly, because we don't actually know what goes into those products. But I'm sure majority of people here know how much it costs to. I mean, like, you got a rough estimate that the amount it takes to produce a phone is nowhere near what you're paying, right? It's margins are probably like half or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but I've heard so many conversations where people know their phone, to make the phone, it's not as expensive as it actually is. Okay, so it can't be fully explained by information asymmetry because people have an idea of how much the phones cost. Or is it something else altogether, basically? Well, I'm not going to give you a full explanation as to why this trend exists. Okay, I'll just give you some explanations I think are worth explaining. Remember the Supreme brick? Okay, if you don't remember this, basically Supreme was a clothing line that decided to sell a shirt with the word Supreme on it, literally a white shirt with the word Supreme on it, and it sold for like £100 or $100 or something like that. It was ridiculous. And you think people would buy a simple shirt like that? I wouldn't buy a simple shirt like that for something so expensive. You'd be wrong. It was sold out. Okay, and then they decided later on, let's make a brick, put the word Supreme on that, literally a brick, and sell it for I think it was like $40 or $50. And do you think people bought that? Definitely. Okay, it even sold for $10,000 at one point in time on eBay because it's all sold out. Okay, and there's that question: why do people do that? Mainly, to be honest with you, there's many explanations, right? But one explanation I can think of is, well, we humans are social creatures, but sometimes we're a bit too social. We sometimes want to show people that we can afford things. Basically, we buy things for the sake of being to say that we can afford it. And this isn't rational at all. Of course not. But that's what it is. And phones recently have become that kind of item, right? It becomes more of I'm gonna say it's a luxury item that is common luxury. Like, there's that expectation that people will have an iPhone, because sometimes it started off just to show off that you've got an iPhone. It certainly was back in school for me. That was a couple of years ago, and then suddenly it started becoming the norm that everybody started having smartphones. But at the same time, it also started to become the norm that premium phones were there to stay. And so it becomes more of a social thing. So it first started off as something that you wanted to show off that you had. And then later on, it just started to become common, that it became like the bare minimum for you to have an expensive phone. Now, whether or not this is right or wrong, I'm not here to judge that. I'm just here to give you some explanation that, the law of demand, while it is a law, there are times when it is violated. And it seems like it's violated. Let me just put that there. Okay? And why? Let's have a look. The big assumption we've had so far in our discussions was that humans were rational. That means we can not selfish, self-interested. We know what's best for us, and we're going to act in the way that is best for us and the people we love. Okay? Unfortunately, humans are not completely rational. All right? Again, just with a supreme example or the first example, we don't completely look out for our own or other people that we love's interest. Not necessarily. Okay, there are some times when we don't engage in the most rational behavior. And now there's a whole branch of economics. It's quite controversial as of the moment. It's called behavioral economics. Basically, this is when psychology marries economics. When we actually put actual psychology into economics and see what actually happens. And this is a whole branch, and this is a field that I actually love reading about. Just all the ways that humans can behave irrationally. And it's so common. So the first book I've read on behavioral economics was Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, and that's in the recommended reading list for you. And it's an absolutely beautiful book about just all the ways that we humans are not rational at all. Okay? And I'll just give you a sampler, okay? So I have two books here on behavioral economics, all right? And well, three. The first one was already predictably irrational. I've shown you that already, but I've got you two more. All right. So the first one here, Thinking Fast and Slow, is by Daniel Kahneman. Very popular book. I would not be surprised if some of you have already heard this book or seen this book, or maybe even your parents have this book. And basically, yeah. So this is one of the first books on behavioral economics, and this is written by a psychologist named Dan Kahneman, who managed to win the Nobel Prize in economics. Mind you, he wasn't an economist; he's a psychologist, and he managed to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And the second book that I recommend is Misbehaving. So this chronicles the story of how behavioral economics came to be. And so this is by Richard Thaler, who is one of the founding fathers of behavioral economics, together with Dan Kahneman, and he also won a Nobel Prize for his work. So these are two quite good books. If you're really interested, I'd suggest give them a read. But again, no pressure, only if you're interested. But for me, this has been something I absolutely loved doing. All right. Let me give you a sampler, and this is from the first few pages of Thaler's book. Okay, like this experiment that he's conducted. Okay, let's play a game. Suppose I offer you a chance to win, guaranteed, 1,000 pesos, or you could take a 50-50 chance to win 2,000 pesos or nothing. What option will you take? Right, let me repeat that. Suppose I offer you a choice. I could either give you 1,000 pesos now, or I could give you a gamble. We'll flip a coin, 50-50. If it lands heads, you get 2,000 from me. If it lands tails, you get nothing. What option will you take? Have a think. Now, if you're in the majority, you would probably take the 1,000 pesos. Okay, you'd probably take 1,000. If you're not in the majority, well, now at least you know you're not in the majority. Okay. Now, let me ask you another question. Suppose now I start off by giving you 2,000. Okay, so I hand you over 2,000 pesos. Now, I give you two options again. You can either give me back 1,000 pesos, which is a guaranteed loss of 1,000, but you still have 1,000 left, right? Or you can take a 50-50 chance to either lose nothing or to lose everything. What will you choose? So again, I give you two options. First of all, I give you 2,000 pesos first, and then I give you two options. You either give me back 1,000 now, or we flip a coin, 50-50. Land heads, you get to keep everything. Land tails, you give me everything back. What will you decide to choose? Now, if you're like the majority of people, you probably went for the 50-50 chance. Okay, so why did I mention this? If you notice, in the first one, the chances, the risk for you for taking the win and loss, right, is the same as it is in the second one. So why do the majority of people um, get the guaranteed 1,000, and why do majority of people want to risk a 50-50? Right? I mean, in the end, look, if you get the guaranteed for both, you get 1,000. It should be the same, right? Your answer for the first one should be the same as your answer for the second one. If you take the 50-50, you probably take the 50-50 for the second one. If you take the guarantee the first one, you probably take the guarantee for the second one. But that doesn't really happen in real life when, tests are run. And why? It's because people don't necessarily behave rationally. There's a whole thing by Kahneman and Amos Tversky for this one. It's called prospect theory. And basically, we tend to deal losses more than gains. And so we are a bit more risky when it comes to losses. And so there's just one of those things where, to somebody who's perfectly rational, both choices are arbitrary. They're the same. However, since we're not perfectly rational, we're humans, we do tend to have preferences of one over the other. So that's my sampler for you. So thank you for listening to this bonus content. I hope that's been enlightening to you. Just an introduction into behavioral economics and also information asymmetry, and how sometimes the law of demand is not that it's being violated. It's just that sometimes there are other factors at play. Thank you. And again, here's some rich credits.